Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for Angles on Art, Math and Art Activities for Families and Students. My name is Angela Parker, and I'm the Docent and Tour Programs Manager at the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum of Art in Hartford, Connecticut. Today, I'm joined by two other educators, whom I'll now ask to introduce themselves as well. Why don't we start with you, Alexander?
Hi guys, my name is Alexander Brooks. I am the Education Manager for the Gaston County Museum of Art and History here in Dallas, North Carolina.
Hi everyone, my name is Libby Keller. Right now I'm a Master's of Education candidate at Harvard, but most recently I'm from the Smith College Museum of Art as a student museum educator.
Thanks to you both. So over the course of our hour together, we're going to be discussing several ways of bringing together math and art, from sacred geometry to angles to probability. All of us will speak briefly to how our projects or programs could be adapted for this time of social distancing and distance learning as well. You'll hear first from Alexander Brooks, then me, and finally Libby Keller. Please feel free to ask questions during our presentations, and we'll also leave a few minutes at the end of our session for any additional questions. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Alexander.
Thank you guys, and let me share screen real quick here. And has everyone got that okay? Thumbs up. All right, excellent. So to give you guys a very quick brief history on how we operate here at our museum, probably a good 75 to 80% of our programming is actually done off-site, where we actually go into the classroom or into another entity to do programming, be it with students or with adults, what have you. I'm going to show you guys 3 different programs here today that we utilize. All of these are geared, from our perspective, for student education, so primarily dealing with schools. All of our programs that we do are multidisciplinary. So we do not have programs where they're solely combined onto one specific topic. We try to pull in different resources and different disciplines into each of our programs. And one of the reasons that we do this, other than it hits on multiple different learning strategies, is that our teachers in our area have specifically asked us not to adhere specifically to a state curriculum, to a state standards. They do not see nor want us to teach state standards. They see that as being their job. What they want from us is more a unique experience where students can take those things they've learned in the classroom and apply it to the experience that they're having with us and with our educators. And these particular programs that we utilize now are part of our art programming, and they do the same exact thing. We pull in multiple disciplines for each of them. So run through them. Our first program that I'm going to talk about is our origami program, and we have geared this for 3rd grade. Now, it's not specific for 3rd grade. This could be used for various different grade levels, but here in the state of North Carolina, 3rd grade is where they start to really delve into geometry and start to study angles as more than just, you know, your basic preschool and early education shapes, basic shapes. And what we use this for is basically being able to showcase to students that math actually has a 3D component, that you can use mathematics and the applied mathematics to actually create something more than just bringing it off the page, basically. So where it's not just sitting there solving a math problem. That's not just what math is about, that it actually has real world output processes. And we do this in a fun way where they actually get to create something that they can then take home. So in this case, we have our little origami mouse because 2020 was the year of the rat in the Chinese zodiac. Now, like I said, every program that we do has multiple components to it, multiple disciplines that we use. So with our origami program, not only are we combining art, obviously, and mathematics, we're also using cultural identity, where we discuss the Eastern zodiac. So each year when we do this program, we always do one animal with the students, and it always ties into the Eastern Zodiac. So this 2020 being the year of the rat, we did mice for the 2 months that we were able to actually get into the classroom with the students. We also bring in linguistical semantics. So we talk about the Japanese word origami and where it comes from, how ori is folding, and actually kami is paper, and then it changes because of linguistic rulings. This is basically, now our elementary school students, our third graders, obviously their mice don't look quite this intricate, but this is sort of the example that we use. And it's basically one of those things where they can actually look at, you know, these different angles that they've started to learn. There are acute angles, there are obtuse angles, and they can actually mess with it. They actually can get hands-on. So this is their hands-on component for the mathematics. And as we're folding, and to be honest, particularly with third graders, we found there's even still at times the misunderstanding of which is your right, which is your left. So you know, it's these sort of things that we're having to deal with in the classroom. And I will say, with this particular program, when our school shut down here in North Carolina, we did not find a good way to be able to do this online. When our schools started back up, they, particularly with the third graders, we really had to get a really hands-on with them and this particular thing. This is a program that actually required 2 educators going into the classroom, and at half the time usually getting the teacher involved as well, walking around actually working with them and folding it. And it wasn't so much that the process was that difficult for them, it was more they quite honestly, it was the right and left that really gave them more problems than anything. They understood the folding, it was which way they were supposed to fold that was very confusing to them when in trying to do this on Zoom. And so this was not something we felt that we could continue online. Do definitely want to bring it back next year if we're able to get into the classroom. Our schools have reopened, but we are not allowed in them. No outside presenters are able to come in at the moment. And of course, next year we'll be doing our nice little year of the ox there. So we'll be doing our ox, and you can sort of get a better idea with him the angles that we're talking about. You know, how those angles actually come about, and it actually builds this 3D form. High school students, on the other hand, we do something a little bit different with them. So with them, we actually bring into this concept of sacred geometry. And with our high school students, whereas with the third graders, we're actually going in, we're just dealing with all the third grade classes in the school typically. Sacred geometry, we're just working with the high school art students. And with them, we have a much broader broad scope of topics that we're discussing in this program because we have a lot more time to deal with it. In this particular program, we typically have about an hour and a half to 2 hours to work with them. And even then, they do not typically finish this project. The project that we actually come out of this with them, they continue to work on in their class after our educators leave. So for this particular program, we're actually looking at the concept of sacred geometry, the golden ratio, the golden mean in art, and we're pulling on, like I said, multiple different disciplines. So we're looking at those mathematics with the golden mean, and we discuss this concept throughout art and how there is this school of thought that this golden mean, which is, if you're familiar with it, is a ratio of 1.618, shows up throughout multiple different paintings of multiple different cultures, shows up in nature, what have you. And we discuss this as a means of how it is very appealing to the human eye, that this is something that it tends to strike a chord in the human brain, and that's why we find it so visually appealing. So further into this particular program, we also discuss how the golden mean is used both in an international context with international art and also in local art. And one of the things, two of the things we tend to talk about is we talk about its usage in Islamic tile work, the mosaics that you can find throughout the Islamic world, some highly, highly beautiful mosaics that tend to use sacred geometry in their patterning. And we also tend to use it with the work of Dr. John Biggers. Now, Dr. Biggers was actually native here to Gaston County. This is where he grew up. This is where he lived for a very long period of time. And it is integral to his work. You can see the geometry, obviously, very easily in his work, the repetitive patterns. He does use the golden ratio quite a bit. He uses the concept of sacred geometry quite a bit in just about all of his works. But one of the things we also bring about to the kids is that it's not just this N.C. Escher type of repetitive pattern all the time, that he actually uses this to showcase things that were very meaningful to him. And he, throughout his life, which was quite interesting, he used his art as a method of trying to basically delve deep into the meaning of his community and the things that meant something to his home life. And he used this while applying the methods of sacred geometry to his art. So of course we have here the shotgun houses that were very, very typical of the neighborhoods that he built, that he grew up in, which is actually like 3 miles down the road from where I'm sitting. The project that we work on with the kids is that they actually get to make their own tile using the formulaics for Islamic tiles. But we have them sort of bring in Dr. Biggers' concepts of that personal story narrative to their tile. So they take an idea that is meaningful to them, something from their own personal narrative, and they use the sacred geometry to design a tile work. And then, of course, because we have to bring in, typically we try to bring in some sort of new medium to them as well. We've added gold leaf to this as well. So they actually get to learn the concept of gold leaf. So not understanding what sacred geometry is.
Yeah.
So sacred geometry, sorry, I saw your hand, Angela. It's a fascinating concept, and it basically involves the repeating patterns, basically into the infinity. It sort of goes through and discusses this divine concept, divine proportions in relation to man's trying to achieve perfection and trying to be closer to God is basically what it is. And if you want to delve into it, I highly recommend looking it up. It can get really, really deep. We do not go that deep into it with the kids. We do give some history, some discussion. I'll be happy to talk to anybody about it after the fact, unfortunately, because I have 2 other lovely presenters here who have some fascinating things to show you. If you want to learn more about it, contact me, please. I would be more than happy to. The third program that we have is our Mount Holly Lantern Parade. So this particular thing, this was actually the first year that the museum was involved in this. So this is not a program that we created. This is a program that we joined in on and collaborated with. Emily Andrus, who is a wonderful artist and gallery owner in the town of Mount Holly here in Gaston County, founded this and started this. And what this is basically a large parade of lanterns that goes through. It's grown every year. This was its 3rd year. And we initially started by doing what we were planning on doing earlier in its concept when we joined in. The museum received a grant to supply materials to any school that wanted to participate in this program. And we originally we were going to be the ones that went into the classrooms, assisted the teachers in helping teach the students how to make their own lanterns so that they could be in the parade. Because of COVID, this obviously did not happen. So what we did instead was we held teacher workshops. We taught the teachers how to do it. And because our schools actually opened up, the bulk of our students in our county actually physically went back to school. The teachers were able then to actually teach their students how to make these lanterns. Now, when I talk about the lanterns, this is what I'm speaking of. Now, this particular lantern here was done by an artist by name of Nancy Jo Salzer. And Nancy actually, she does not work at a school, but she had several students come in and help her that belonged to a school that did not wish to participate. To give you an idea of how big this guy is, now he is fully articulated. So you can see the engineering that had to go into this. His tail moves, his wings flap, all of his legs are articulated. His jaw is articulated by pulleys. Fire comes in and out. And this is him with some people as size reference. So he is about 17 feet long, about 10 feet high, and about 12 feet with the wingspan. His he is a startling example. This is more typical. So what we did for COVID was, instead of having the parade where everybody's on top of one another and they're not able to social distance and see the parade, we did a reverse parade where we set all of the lanterns up through as an exhibit on a trail. We worked with the town of Mount Holly for one of the parks, and people are able to socially distance. We had timed groupings where they could walk through. Everybody was masked up. It worked absolutely wonderful. The EG here is for East Gaston High School. This is one of their entries into this. And this is judged. There was actually prizes and what have you. So our theme this year was circus, which is why you'll see several circus things. This was Ida Rankin Elementary School. The older students that were involved in this built the elephant on their little stand here. The younger grades, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all made these balloons, which actually go up a lot higher. And please forgive the poor quality of the photos. It's hard to take at night. And then there's the museum's entry into this as well. We were not judged, but we did participate because it was fun. So mathematically though, and this went into mathematics and engineering, we dealt with them with the ratios, because basically you had to, unlike the origami, this was a lot more intricate where you had to get into the engineering behind it. We had to discuss ratios to get proportions correctly, dealing with the different sizes of circles being used, and then also getting into structurally, how things were structurally sound, where were your connection points, and start to get into the mathematics of actually engineering these things so that they could actually stand up, sometimes standing up on their own, since we would actually not have people carrying them this year. So you can see our little wiener dogs and our little tutu cat there, our little ballerina cat. So that, in a nutshell, and I believe my 15 minutes is up, is what we've been doing.
Great. Great. Any other questions for Alexander? I'm watching the Q&A in the chat now, so feel free to ask questions now, or again, we'll have some time at the end as well. I think for now, we'll go ahead and I'll talk to you a little bit more about angles, but in a totally different setting. So let me share my screen here. Okay. So for the past several years at the Wadsworth, we've hosted an annual professional development day focused on STEAM, which has been a great way for us to explore the collection with a new set of interpretive lenses, and also to collaborate with education staff from other local institutions, including the Connecticut Science Center, which is located just a short walking distance away from the Wadsworth. So today I'll be presenting a project that started as a workshop for the summer 2019 session. And the essential question for the workshop was, how do the angles that an artist uses contribute to the mood or the action of an artwork? To explore this question, we took to the galleries with protractors in hand. And I gave each of the teachers desaturated printouts of each artwork that they could mark up. I initially planned to do the same with you all, but the move to virtual means you are saved from dusting off the memories of elementary school protractor use. But that said, there are really easy to use online protractors that would enable you to replicate this experience virtually. And I'll speak briefly to one you may find helpful at the end of my time today. So to demonstrate how you might pursue a similar project in your own museum, I'm going to discuss a selection of the works that we explored in the workshop and explain how measuring the angles in each of them can help enrich the discussion around them. And I've intentionally chosen three pretty different works. So we'll look at a surrealistic still life, a landscape, and a figural group. So we're going to start off with, with this piece by Giorgio de Chirico, La maladie du général, or the general's illness, from 1914-1915. So De Chirico was an Italian painter who was a predecessor of the Surrealist, and several members of that later group cited him as an influence on their work. Like the Surrealist, he combined classical Greco-Roman forms with mundane objects from his own era and of his own invention to create strange, dreamlike compositions. And this work is a good example of how he often in his works aimed to create an eerie mood and a sort of unnerving sense of unbalance. So in discussing this as a group, we spoke about just how De Chirico was able to achieve that eerie mood and unnerving sense of unbalance, thinking about things like the odd angles at which each of the objects are set in the composition, their uncertain relationship to each other, an uncertainty about what the objects are, but also how their size and scale might speak to one another. And where exactly we're placed. We seem to be in a bit of a landscape, a bit of a still life with this stage-like composition, a glowering green background or sky in the background of the painting. And elements that seem to be defying the normal nature of things. For instance, the white wall on the left-hand side of the composition is leaning away from, rather than towards, the small white support, which would ostensibly be holding it up. So how does measuring these angles help potentially deepen the conversation about these compositional elements? One of the things we discovered as we were looking at it through that lens was that not only are all of the objects set at an odd acute angle to the rest of the composition, they're all at slightly different angles from one another, which helps create this sense of imbalance, of uncertainty, of an uncertain relationship between objects. And the other thing that was interesting is that objects that seem stable, objects that we might usually look to in a composition to get a sense of the space, like the building in the background, none of them were at exactly a 90-degree angle. They were either at a slightly acute or slightly obtuse angle. Again, just adding to the sense of unbalance or eeriness, and helping us to understand just how De Chirico went about that compositionally, which could help also open up a conversation with older students about the sort of socio-political environment in which De Chirico is creating his work, right on the eve and into the beginning of World War I, perhaps drawing into these surrealistic views of Italian landscape. And speaking of landscape, we then looked at pieces like Claude Joseph Vernet's The Storm from 1787. Vernet was an 18th century French painter who specialized in views of the ocean. And this is one of several paintings he completed showing storms at sea. And so for this painting, we were looking at, in particular, how Vernet uses strong diagonal lines to structure the composition, and also to add to the sense of action and drama in this dramatic scene of a storm at sea. And so some of the things that we drew our eyes to was the strong diagonal line created by the cliff on the left-hand side of the composition as it drives into the ocean. The two lines of the dense storm clouds coming in from the right-hand side of the composition in the background as they meet the mountain range in the distance. And then closer in, the angles of the waves as they break, these dense glassy waves. The movement of the figures as some figures try to rescue others from the water. And finally, the mast of the ship that has wrecked, but also an element that might not immediately jump to your eye because it's in the shadow of the storm, the ship that's in the background, which is also at a precarious angle to the sea. So how could measuring angles help us dig deeper into this piece? A couple of the things that we talked about were, one, how these diagonal lines meet at dramatic angles that often are a point of interest in the composition, whether that's where the storm clouds meet the mountain range, where the cliff ends and juts out, showcasing some of the human emotion in these figures that have been saved from the shipwreck but are looking at the destruction yet to come. And also perhaps some foreshadowing as well in the way that Verney set the mast of the ship that is wrecked at almost the same angle as the ship in the background, potentially telling us something about what's to come for that crew. And finally, we looked at some pieces that were either singular portraits or larger figural groups, including this contemporary piece by Micheline Thomas, Raquel with Les Trois Femmes from 2018. Micheline Thomas is a contemporary African-American artist who's best known for her photographs and her mixed media paintings. Her subjects are almost always women of color and often queer women of color. She's really interested in the intersection of those two identities and have included well-known figures such as Eartha Kitt and Michelle Obama. In a lot of her work, she's appropriating and transforming works from prior eras. And in this case, works by 19th century artists such as Edward Manet, by placing modern models in poses and settings borrowed from those earlier paintings. Specifically, in this case, Edward Manet's The Luncheon on the Grass. So when looking at these two pieces together, we talked about the multitude of ways in which Thomas is transforming this original work. And some of the things that we dug into were the ways in which she takes what's ostensibly a natural setting in the Manet, this idyllic grove, but is truly, once we look closer at the painting, oddly artificial, and leans into that artificiality with a 70s rec room, carpeted in astroturf with faux flowers and fruit scattered across it, faux trees in the background, and cascades of floral 70s textiles on the left-hand side and in a lot of the women's clothing. We also spoke about moving from a painting in which there are all white figures, most of whom are largely disengaged from the viewer, to a painting with all Black figures, all women who are directly engaging with the viewer, and a change from the display of the female nude within the context of the male gaze to a confident group of Black women who are owning their sexuality, where there may, if there is any sexual tension or desire, is a homosexual rather than a heterosexual sexuality. So all the many ways in which she's changing it, some of them readily apparent, some of them not. And so how can angles help in this conversation? One of the things that really brought out was some of the more subtle ways that Micheline Thomas was transforming Manet's work. Specifically in the small changes to the gestures and poses of each of the figures. I want to focus in on the two figures who are in the front of each of the groupings. Here, the man on the right-hand side of the Manet, with a hand pointing, gesturing to the other side of the painting. With the slight shift of an elbow turns from a gesture of pointing to one of offering, with a small faux flower in the hand of the female figure in the Thomas piece. And then really interestingly, the model Raquel, whose name is in the title and is the figure on the left-hand side of Thomas's piece, while she's holding her elbow at much the same angle as the female nude in the Manet, that small change in how angled her leg is really changes the entire nature of that pose, the attitude with which she's holding her body, from that original pose of the nude in the Manet. So it helped in terms of this discussion with moving from the big and overt changes to thinking about how even the smallest of changes really communicated a new message. And so in closing, I just want to offer, as I said, and I'll put this link in the chat, a thought about how to do this in the virtual realm. So there's a lot of online protractors available. This is the one I used to build this particular presentation. You can easily upload images. You see the Dakiriko again. Move the protractor around and measure away to your heart's desire. So I hope this has given you a sense of how you could potentially do something like this in your own collection, and how it can not only bring in mathematics, but also really enrich visual analysis conversations. So with that, I'm gonna hand things over to Libby.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Angela. I've loved learning about angles by looking at art through your work, so thank you to both of you. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about one of the programs that comes from the Smith College Museum of Art, and I'll share my slides so that you can see. So I've sort of given this activity the name Abstract Probabilities. And both of these things are sort of the main ideas of this mathematical artistic activity that you can do in the galleries. And also I want to share with you sort of a way that I've figured out how to adapt it online, and maybe we'll give it a try together. But you'll have to bear with us as we're not quite sure about the technical difficulties that might arise from that. So we shall see. So this activity comes from a program at the Smith College of Museum of Art 2 years ago that was called Mad Math. And because SCMA is an academic museum that comes right from Smith, we had the unique opportunity of being able to collaborate across the college with different departments. So Mad Math was a campus-wide day of math. And the math department reached out to the museum education department and asked us, hey, do you think you could incorporate Mad Math Museum? And we took this on as an interesting challenge, and we were like, yes, let's plan some activities. And so this is one of the for math. And to share with you of math in galleries works well, especially if your model is like ours was at Smith. Where when you have groups of children or families or even adults come in, the way you look at art is inquiry-based and exploratory, centered around discussion, hands-on, and interactive in the galleries. Math, or the kind of math that mathematicians do, maybe not always in school math, but real math is the same way. It's inquiry-based, it focuses on a question and finding an answer, and art and math have these things in common. Math and art both have existed for generations, for thousands and thousands of years, and have been common threads for humanity that seek art or seek truth and beauty in the world. So in this way, both art and math are humanistic. And in your galleries, you can support and enrich classroom learning of math with this really interdisciplinary, multidimensional learning. Children and even adults, everybody learns better when you engage multiple parts of the brain. So by teaching math in the art gallery, you present to whoever you're teaching this really unique and new view. This picture wasn't from the day of Mad Math. It's just one of my very favorite pictures of teaching in the Smith College Museum of Art galleries. Very fun. So this semester at Harvard, I've been sort of taking this idea and really building on it and really fleshing it out. So I pulled out a few quotes from scholarly reading I'm doing right now. And the scholars are really behind aesthetic math learning. And so these are a few that I found really meaningful. So the middle one comes from an article by these two authors who basically did this sort of thought experiment. One of them is an artist and one of them is a mathematician, and each of them gave each other a try with, you know, their original discipline in mind, and found these really beautiful connections there. And in their article, they ended up writing, we believe that the understanding of meanings of mathematics, often through aesthetic experiences, comes before an understanding of analytic formalisms. So even as a way to introduce a new math unit, art is useful both in your classroom and in your gallery. So even as a museum educator or as a classroom educator, you can find these rich connections between the two. And then I also pulled out two quotes from mathematicians, and the Hirsch is one of them. He is a practicing, he is since this writing passed away, but was a practicing mathematician his whole life, and wrote, mathematics is a human activity. And I just really love that because I think art is too. So the idea for this kind of activity where we get the chance to experiment with probability in artworks comes from experimenting with what kind of can we find in abstract expressionism. So this painting is from the Smith College Museum of Art collections. It's called Blue Atmosphere 2. And Helen Frankenthaler sort of pioneered the color wash, the idea of color wash, and the pictures of her working in her studio are just beautiful. She'd lay out her canvas on the floor and, have an idea for the kind of like landscape of the work. Often her ideas would come from nature, but then she would sort of let chance take over and wash her canvas in color. So this wasn't the painting I did this activity with at the Smith College Museum of Art when I tested it in the galleries. But I did sort of think about this one as I was thinking about how can we play with chance? And so the one that I want to show you and try out an activity with is this one, which actually comes from the National Gallery of Art. And it's another Frankenthaler. It's called Mountains and Sea. And before we give it a little test, I'll tell you a little bit about the process of how we would structure this activity in the galleries. So we start with close looking. Harvard Project Zero has a lot of different conversational, really inquiry-based, lovely options for starting a discussion. And two that I pulled out that I think would work really well for this artwork in particular would be See, Think, Wonder. It's a very basic structure where you can have members of your group share something they see, something they think, and something they wonder. Or you can go around the circle and do one at a time. There's various options. Or looking 10 times 2, 10 by 2, where you write down, you look carefully, write down 10 things that you see, or phrases about what you see, or ideas, take a pause, and then do it all over again. So starting with the looking, really foregrounding the math in the art is important. And then doing some inquiry, having some conversation among you and the group of people that you're looking at this artwork with. And I think this would be a good opportunity to start drawing on the math, start thinking mathematically. So for younger children, you could pose to them, find a detail you see only once, find a detail you see many times, get them established in. And for older children or adults, you could ask them to even think very explicitly, can you make a connection between math and this artwork? Really get the ideas flowing, because you might find that members of your group have lots of ideas about math in this artwork beyond what you've even come up with. And then once all that really important foregrounding of the work is done, you can start to draw in the mathematics. So the way this activity works, I'm going to close this part of my share to show you another part of my share, is this part where you can get out your dice and start rolling your dice on the gallery floor. These are my dice, which are from the dollar store. At Smith, we use some whiteboard dice, so you can draw little pictures or numbers or whatever you want on them. And then first challenge your students to think about what is the probability that we roll any one of these shapes. So give them an example, like a pink ellipse or a light blue curve. And on each side of your dice, you would either draw something or have a prompt for them to draw. And then everybody, you can either sort of just make it simple and tell them that the probability of rolling any one color and shape is 1 in 36, or you could take a little longer and have them try to make a list of every possibility, which is probably pretty tricky, but and it would take a few minutes because they'd have to come up with all 36 possibilities, but it would, get everybody thinking about, oh, in creating a piece of artwork, maybe the artist had a general idea of what they wanted to do, like Helen Frankenthaler, before they let chance and probability take over. And then you can roll out on the floor of your gallery or use a poster board, whatever is easiest for you, a large sheet of paper that your participants can all draw on and contribute to a collaborative work of art that relies on chance. So the way this is adapted to be online is you can just use a random number generator, which is the first thing to come up on Google. Google has one if you type in random number generator. And Angela, do you think we're going to be able to let people annotate? What do you think? No. Okay. So the original plan was in Zoom, there is a function where if someone's screen sharing, you can go up to the top and where it says you are viewing Libby Keller's screen or whoever's screen. Underneath more, there is the option to annotate. Ah, Angela can draw. That's lovely. Thanks, Angela. So maybe Angela and Alexander, do you both mind doing a little bit of this with me? Great. I'm sorry, participants, if you can't annotate, I'm so sorry. I would love for you to be able to. So if I go right into Google and I generate my 2 random numbers, which I would like to do, I have too many windows open. Is I can generate my 2 numbers. So the first one is 5 and the second one is 2. So Angela and Alexander, if your first number is 5, your color is black and your shape is a thin line. So I'm giving them some guidelines. Now they can go ahead and contribute to our collaborative canvas. Beautiful. Excellent, excellent. Okay, let's do one more just to really solidify our artwork. Okay, your first number is 3 and your second number is 2. If I were in a gallery, I would definitely be handing my dice. They would be all over the gallery by this point, but we'd be having so much fun. So 3 and 2 means you're going for a light green thin line. Nice. Beautiful. Thanks to you both. I wanted to share my presentation one more time, if I can find it. Well, I can't find it on my share. But anyway, I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening in and being here. And I might put my email in the chat. As I continue to write this big paper about math in galleries, I'd love to hear from you if you're teaching math in your galleries. And keep on collecting these examples. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Libby. We have some time for questions, so we'll wait a couple minutes, see if anybody has any questions for any of us. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining. We hope we've given you some new thoughts about how you might bring math and art together, whether it's in the galleries or in the classroom with schools in your community. Well, I think we will wrap up in just a minute. Alexander or Libby, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I do not know. I'll add my email as well, so if anybody wishes to contact.
Great. Well, I'll just thank you all again, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your NEMA this year. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.